The concept of heaven and hell is a narrative one that was shaped by ancient civilizations and passed down through generations as a tool for control and fear. These aren't divine revelations. They're myths, reimagined, borrowed, and presented as absolute truths. Does that sound too critical? Stay with me, because this isn't just doubt, it's a journey through history. For much of human history, the afterlife wasn't seen as a system of rewards for the virtuous or punishments for the wicked. In ancient Judaism, early scriptures barely touched on concepts resembling heaven and hell. Instead, the Old Testament describes Sheol, a shadowy realm devoid of fire, pitchforks, or golden gates. It was a silent, dim place where all the dead resided, heroes, sinners, kings, and peasants alike. Morality had no bearing. The afterlife was simply a resting place. So, where did our contemporary notions of the afterlife originate? Here's the twist: they were borrowed. The concept of eternal torment in hell stems from Zoroastrianism, an ancient Persian religion that introduced the idea of cosmic dualism, an eternal clash between good and evil, reward and punishment. During the Jewish exile in Babylon, they encountered these ideas, which gradually seeped into their theological framework. Then the Greeks entered the scene. Their underworld, ruled by Hades, was far more structured than Sheol. The virtuous were sent to the Elysian fields, a realm of eternal peace, while the wicked were condemned to Tartarus. Greek philosophy embraced the notion of moral consequences after death, and when Christianity emerged, deeply influenced by Greco-Roman culture, it adopted and rebranded these ideas. By the time the New Testament was written, the afterlife had evolved into a dualistic weapon: heaven for the righteous, hell for the wicked. But here's the catch: the Bible itself doesn't consistently describe heaven or hell. Jesus in the Gospels mentions Gehenna, a literal valley outside Jerusalem where garbage was burned, not a mystical underworld. The Apostle Paul, he's silent on hell altogether, focusing instead on resurrection and salvation. And the book of Revelation, it's a vivid apocalyptic vision packed with symbolism, not a definitive theological roadmap. Fast forward to medieval Europe, and the Christian church had transformed these scattered ideas into dogma. Why? To maintain control. The promise of eternal bliss or the threat of eternal damnation became a potent tool. Hell, in particular, was used to instill fear, enforce obedience, and justify the sale of indulgences, essentially offering salvation for a price. Heaven and hell were no longer spiritual truths, but instruments of manipulation. And let's not overlook Dante. His Divine Comedy, written in the 14th century, etched into our minds the vivid and terrifying imagery of hell: circles of torment, lakes of fire, and demons endlessly torturing sinners. But here's the twist: Dante wasn't penning theology, he was crafting poetry. Yet, his fictional vision of hell has shaped our collective imagination for generations. The modern concept of heaven and hell isn't divine revelation. It's a collage of Persian myths, Greek philosophy, Roman politics, and medieval fear tactics. It's a narrative woven by humans, not handed down from the heavens. For much of history, the afterlife wasn't about moral judgment. Instead, it was seen as a vague, shadowy continuation of existence, a neutral realm, not a paradise or a pit of despair. However, as societies advanced, so did their stories. Here's the reality: our current ideas about the afterlife are a product of cultural borrowing, political manipulation, and myth-making spanning centuries. Take ancient Egypt, for instance. Their vision of the afterlife centered on Maat, the principle of cosmic order. For the Egyptians, life after death wasn't about morality. It was about preserving balance. The wealthy and powerful could afford elaborate mummification rituals to secure their place in the field of reeds, a tranquil mirror of the earthly world. The poor, however, weren't as fortunate. Access to a good afterlife depended on status and preparation, not virtue. In ancient Mesopotamia, the afterlife was grim. All people, regardless of their deeds in life, descended to the same dark underworld known as Kur. There, they existed as shadows in an eternity devoid of hope, judgment, or reward. This bleak vision shaped their culture, emphasizing survival and legacy in life over concerns about what lay beyond. When the Greeks entered the picture, they introduced a new level of complexity. Their underworld, ruled by Hades, was divided into realms that reflected a person's deeds. The virtuous could rest eternally in the Elysian fields, while the truly wicked faced punishment in Tartarus. But here's the key: Tartarus wasn't for ordinary sinners. It was reserved for mythological figures who committed extraordinary offenses against the gods. For most people, the afterlife was neither torment nor bliss, but a neutral existence in the Asphodel Meadows. Hinduism and Buddhism offered a different perspective on the afterlife. Instead of eternal punishment or reward, these traditions introduced samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. In this system, your karma, or the sum of your actions, determined your next life. There was no fiery inferno or glittering palace, just an endless loop of reincarnation until achieving enlightenment broke the cycle. The focus wasn't on divine judgment, but on self-improvement and liberation. This fluid, cyclical view of the afterlife stands in sharp contrast to the binary framework of heaven and hell, later embraced by Christianity. Now, let's jump to ancient Rome, where religion was strategically co-opted to serve political ends. Roman emperors claimed divine status and used the promise of the afterlife to reinforce their authority. Allegiance to the empire was tied to allegiance to the gods, and loyalty to the gods supposedly secured a favorable afterlife. As for disloyalty, well, let's just say the afterlife wasn't looking too promising. Here, the afterlife became less about personal morality and more about submission to power. When Christianity began to rise, it absorbed this evolving mix of religious and political ideas. Early Christians lived under Roman rule, and their beliefs reflected a blend of Jewish teachings and Greco-Roman culture. But something pivotal occurred. Christianity started using the afterlife as a tool. Heaven and hell transformed from abstract concepts into weapons in a battle for influence over hearts, minds, and ultimately control. The promise of eternal reward or the threat of eternal punishment wasn't just doctrine. It was a potent motivator. This approach wasn't exclusive to Christianity. Islamic eschatology similarly developed under specific historical and cultural influences. The Quran describes detailed images of paradise and hell, but these were shaped by the broader context of the ancient Near East. Like in other traditions, concepts of reward and punishment were crafted to inspire devotion and discourage dissent. At its core, the story of the afterlife isn't about divine revelation, it's about adaptation. Societies have continuously reinterpreted death and what follows to meet their needs, whether to comfort the grieving, control the population, or make sense of life's mysteries. The afterlife evolved not because it was revealed, but because humans needed it too. By the Middle Ages, the afterlife had grown into a comprehensive narrative. It wasn't just a belief anymore, it was an intricate system complete with vivid descriptions, rigid moral expectations, and above all, severe consequences. But these ideas weren't grounded in universal truths. They were constructed atop layers of ancient myths, political agendas, and cultural shifts. Now, let's shift our attention to what science can actually measure. For decades, researchers have explored the profound question of what happens when we die. The answers they've uncovered are far more grounded and far less magical than popular narratives suggest. Death isn't an on or off switch. It's a process, not a singular event. Neuroscience has mapped out the predictable series of changes that occur in the brain during the moments before and after death. As oxygen levels in blood flow decline, the brain enters a hyperactive state, triggering a surge of electrical activity. This is the biological foundation of what many describe as near-death experiences. Those vivid visions of tunnels, bright lights, or a deep sense of peace. They're not evidence of the afterlife, but rather the brain's attempt to interpret its own shutdown. Take the classic tunnel of light, for example. Studies reveal that this phenomenon is linked to the visual cortex, which reacts to oxygen deprivation. As oxygen diminishes, the narrowing of vision creates the perception of a tunnel. That profound sense of peace? It's the brain releasing endorphins, natural chemicals that ease pain and stress during traumatic moments. These sensations feel deeply meaningful because they occur at the core of our consciousness. However, they are not proof of life beyond death. Instead, they represent the brain's remarkable ability to manage its final moments. Controlled experiments have tested the validity of ND claims. In one study, researchers placed hidden images in hospital rooms, images visible only from an elevated perspective. The goal? To determine if patients experiencing cardiac arrest and reporting out-of-body experiences could describe these images. The results were clear. No evidence supported such abilities. What feels like floating above the body is more likely a trick of memory and perception, not actual separation from the physical self. Perhaps even more compelling is the ongoing research into how consciousness functions. Our thoughts, emotions, and sense of identity are not mystical forces. They're the product of billions of neurons firing in intricate patterns. When the brain ceases to function, so too does the self. This isn't speculation, it's biology. There is no scientific evidence to support the idea that consciousness exists independently of the brain. Much like a computer program ceases to operate when its hardware is shut down, the self dissolves when the brain stops. And yet, the human need to believe in an afterlife endures. Why is that? Evolution may hold the answer. Our ancestors developed a fear of death because it helped them survive. Early humans who avoided dangerous situations lived long enough to pass on their genes. But with that survival instinct came an equally powerful need to make sense of death. The concept of an afterlife wasn't just a comfort, it became a psychological adaptation to help us face the unknown. Scientists have also sought to determine whether there's any measurable energy or substance that could validate the idea of a soul. Spoiler alert, there's no evidence. Claims that the soul is a form of energy conflict with the laws of physics. Energy doesn't simply drift into the universe after death, it transforms into heat, motion, or other measurable forms. Your body's energy doesn't escape to another dimension. It remains here, fueling the natural processes of decomposition and entropy. Consider the famous 21 grams experiment conducted by Dr. Duncan McDougall in 1907. He claimed that patients weighed slightly less at the moment of death, interpreting this as proof of a soul leaving the body. But his methods were riddled with flaws, his results were unrepeatable, and the scientific community ultimately dismissed his findings. To this day, modern science recognizes no credible evidence for the existence of a soul or any non-physical essence departing the body after death. What about paranormal claims? Stories of ghosts, mediums, and near-death testimonies abound, but they're overwhelmingly anecdotal. No controlled experiment has ever verified communication with the dead. In fact, most so-called supernatural phenomena have been debunked as hoaxes, psychological suggestion, or simple misinterpretation of natural events. Here's the bottom line. Science doesn't support the idea of an afterlife. Consciousness, as far as we know, is a product of the brain, and when the brain ceases to function, so does the self. Near-death experiences and out-of-body perceptions are undoubtedly fascinating, but they're rooted in biology, not metaphysics. The afterlife, as depicted in religious and cultural traditions, remains unproven. What science does confirm is this: life ends when the brain shuts down. While that truth may feel unsettling, it's also liberating. Science doesn't provide comforting fantasies, it offers reality. And that reality is often more empowering than any myth. In the Christian Bible, the concept of heaven and hell is anything but consistent. Take the Old Testament, for example. Books like Ecclesiastes describe the dead as going to Sheol, a shadowy, neutral realm where everyone good or bad ends up. There's no judgment, no reward, and no punishment. Even King David, a pivotal figure in Judaism and Christianity, speaks of joining his son in death without any mention of heaven or hell. The focus in these texts isn't on the afterlife. It's on living fully in the present. But then the New Testament arrives and shifts the narrative. Suddenly, there's a binary framework: eternal bliss in heaven or eternal suffering in hell. Yet, even here, the details remain unclear. Jesus mentions Gehenna, often interpreted as hell, but Gehenna was a literal place, a garbage dump outside Jerusalem where waste was incinerated. Was he speaking literally or using it as a metaphor? And let's not forget that Jesus often taught in parables, leaving room for interpretation. How much of this was meant to describe a tangible afterlife? And then there's Paul, one of Christianity's key theological figures. Surprisingly, he barely mentions hell. Instead, Paul emphasizes salvation through faith and the hope of resurrection. His writings focus on eternal life, not eternal damnation. This silence begs the question: if hell is such a cornerstone of Christian doctrine, why does Paul, one of its architects, seem to downplay it? The contradictions extend to Revelation, which presents an entirely different and much more vivid vision. Written in an apocalyptic style, Revelation speaks of lakes of fire, eternal suffering, and judgment days. However, many biblical scholars agree that these descriptions are deeply symbolic, more a critique of Roman persecution than a literal depiction of the afterlife. Its purpose was likely to comfort the oppressed, not to provide a definitive roadmap of eternity. Now, let's move beyond Christianity and examine how other religions perceive the afterlife. In Islam, the Quran vividly describes paradise as a lush garden filled with abundance and pleasure, while hell is a realm of fire and torment. However, what determines who ends up where isn't entirely straightforward. Some verses stress faith in Allah as the path to salvation, while others emphasize good deeds. This creates a tension. A moral individual without faith may be damned, while a believer with questionable actions could be saved. This inconsistency raises tough questions about divine justice. Hinduism and Buddhism, by contrast, revolve around reincarnation and karma. Your actions in this life dictate your next one, whether it's a step toward enlightenment or deeper entanglement in the cycle of samsara. But even these traditions have their complexities. Different texts debate what truly determines the course of reincarnation. Are actions alone enough, or do intentions also play a role? And what about enlightenment? Some teachings suggest it can be achieved in a single lifetime, while others imply it takes countless cycles of rebirth. These variations highlight the human influence in shaping these doctrines. Finally, Judaism offers a unique perspective. Traditional Jewish teachings focus more on this life than the next. The Talmud contains a wide array of opinions about the afterlife. Some rabbis envision a future resurrection, others describe a form of judgment, and still others suggest that the afterlife is unknowable. This diversity of thought reflects Judaism's embrace of debate, but it also underscores the lack of a unified doctrine. These contradictions are not random. They reflect the evolution of religious ideas over centuries, influenced by cultural shifts, political agendas, and social dynamics. Different authors, contexts, and motivations produced vastly different visions of what comes after death. The result? A mosaic of beliefs that often contradict rather than complement one another. Now, let's peel back the layers of mythology, theology, and cultural conditioning. From the perspective of atheists and agnostics, the conversation around the afterlife takes a simpler turn. It's about reality. Their consensus is straightforward: death is the end. No paradise, no eternal suffering, no continuation. This isn't a belief system. It's a conclusion drawn from evidence, or rather, the absence of it. The atheist perspective: atheists view the afterlife as a comforting illusion, a story humanity created to soothe its fear of mortality. To them, the concept doesn't hold up because there's no mechanism for consciousness to persist once the brain ceases to function. Current scientific understanding suggests that consciousness is entirely dependent on the physical brain. When the brain stops working, so does the self. Prominent atheist thinkers like Sam Harris have meticulously examined the idea of an afterlife. Harris equates belief in a soul or essence that survives death to believing in ghosts. Both, he argues, are rooted in wishful thinking rather than evidence. While the thought of an eternal soul might comfort some, Harris advocates for embracing the finality of death as a more honest and productive approach to life. Richard Dawkins pushes this argument further, dismissing the afterlife as a delusion. To Dawkins, not only is the idea improbable, it's unnecessary. He asserts that life derives its meaning precisely from its finiteness. The notion of infinite existence, whether in heaven or elsewhere, lacks evolutionary or philosophical coherence. Dawkins argues that nature owes us nothing immortality, least of all. Life, he says, is a fleeting, remarkable accident, a temporary arrangement of matter and energy. And when it's over, it's simply over. The agnostic approach: agnostics, meanwhile, take a more cautious stance. They don't claim certainty, acknowledging the lack of conclusive evidence either way. Often misunderstood as indecisive, the agnostic position is actually more nuanced. Agnostics argue that the question of what happens after death might be fundamentally unknowable, a mystery beyond the reach of human understanding. But this doesn't mean they endorse fabricating answers. For agnostics, intellectual honesty is key, accepting the limits of what we can truly know. They emphasize that the absence of an afterlife doesn't diminish the value of existence. Instead, it heightens it. If this life is all we have, then every decision, every moment, becomes profoundly significant. Without an eternity to set things right, life becomes an irreplaceable opportunity, one without a second chance. A critique of the afterlife's moral framework: atheists and agnostics often challenge the moral framework tied to the concept of an afterlife. The idea that someone's eternal destiny hinges on adherence to religious dogma raises serious questions. Why would an omnipotent deity demand blind faith or rigid obedience as prerequisites for eternal happiness? And why would finite actions warrant eternal punishment? These aren't just philosophical musings. They expose logical inconsistencies in many afterlife narratives. For atheists and agnostics, rejecting the afterlife isn't an act of nihilism, it's an embrace of reality. They view death as a natural part of life's cycle, not an event to fear or mystify. Elaborate explanations or comforting fantasies aren't necessary. The end of consciousness to them isn't a tragedy, it's simply the way the universe operates. Near-death experiences: and these many people who report near-death experiences, these describe strikingly similar sensations, floating above their bodies, a sense of peace, and visions of a bright light or tunnel. Some even recount meeting deceased loved ones or divine figures. But here's the catch: these experiences aren't exclusive to any single religion or culture. For instance, a Christian might claim to see Jesus, while a Hindu could encounter Yama, the Lord of Death. This variation suggests that these are influenced by personal beliefs and cultural backgrounds, not universal truths. Science and near-death experiences. Science provides compelling, evidence-based explanations for NDEs, dismantling much of the mysticism surrounding them. NDEs typically occur during moments of extreme stress on the brain, such as cardiac arrest, oxygen deprivation, or severe trauma. During these critical moments, the brain releases a surge of endorphins and dopamine, producing sensations of euphoria and calm. What about the famous tunnel of light? Neuroscience links this phenomenon to the visual cortex, which reacts to oxygen deprivation. As blood flow diminishes, the narrowing of vision creates the illusion of a tunnel. Similarly, feelings of peace and visions of loved ones arise from the brain accessing deeply ingrained memories and emotional patterns. These aren't glimpses into another realm. They are the brain's remarkable way of managing its own decline, offering comfort during its final moments. Out-of-body experiences. OBS. Out-of-body experiences, or OBS, often accompany near-death experiences, NDEs, and are another fascinating yet explainable phenomenon. People frequently describe floating above their bodies, observing their surroundings from an elevated perspective. While this might seem supernatural, neuroscience has demonstrated that OBS are illusions generated by the brain. Studies have shown that stimulating specific regions of the brain, such as the temporoparietal junction, can induce OBS in controlled experiments. This suggests that OBS aren't evidence of a soul leaving the body, but rather a disruption in the brain's spatial awareness systems. Controlled experiments have further tested claims of OBS. In one well-known study, researchers placed hidden images on high shelves in hospital rooms, images visible only from an aerial viewpoint. If OBS were genuine, patients experiencing them should have been able to identify these images. The outcome? Not a single patient could accurately describe the hidden images. What felt like a transcendent experience was, in reality, a trick of the brain. The role of memory and perception. The appearance of deceased loved ones during NDEs is also explainable through psychology. When the brain is under extreme stress, it draws from deeply ingrained memories and emotions. Encountering a familiar face provides comfort and helps to alleviate the fear of death. This isn't a spiritual visitation, it's a natural psychological response designed to protect the mind. Similarly, skeptics have examined claims from individuals who report being clinically dead for minutes or even hours before returning with vivid accounts of heaven or hell. The term clinically dead can be misleading. It refers to a temporary cessation of measurable activity, like heartbeat or breathing. However, brain activity often continues for several minutes, meaning consciousness hasn't completely shut down. These experiences occur in a gray area between life and death, driven by the brain's remaining functions, not by evidence of an afterlife. Paranormal claims and mediums. The notion of communicating with the dead through mediums or psychics is equally unsubstantiated. Controlled experiments consistently expose these practices as fraudulent or reliant on cold reading techniques, a method where mediums use vague statements and subtle cues to give the impression of supernatural knowledge. Under strict testing conditions, these supposed abilities consistently fail to deliver verifiable results. Even cases of past life memories fail under scrutiny. Most of these claims are revealed to be false memories, shaped by suggestion, media influences, or childhood imagination. Take, for example, the infamous case of Bridey Murphy, where a woman claimed to recall a past life. Upon investigation, it was shown to be a fabrication, influenced by childhood memories rather than evidence of reincarnation. The persistence of mystical claims. The persistence of NDEs and other mystical claims comes down to one key factor: humans fear uncertainty. Facing the void of the unknown is deeply unsettling, so we fill that void with stories, visions, and beliefs to make sense of it. But the science is clear these experiences are reflections of the brain's extraordinary efforts to comfort and protect itself as it shuts down. They're fascinating and undeniably human, but they're not evidence of an afterlife. What many interpret as a glimpse into another world is, in reality, the brain's final masterpiece before the lights go out. Death as a universal experience, death is a universal reality. Across all cultures, religions, and eras, humanity has wrestled with the same fundamental question: what happens when the lights go out? Despite thousands of years of inquiry through religion, philosophy, science, and personal experiences, there's still no definitive answer. And perhaps that's the point. The unknown has always been a powerful catalyst for discovery, pushing us to explore the boundaries of existence. Modern science has stripped much of the mystique from death. Biologically, we understand what happens. The body breaks down, cells cease functioning, and the energy that sustains life dissipates into the environment. But what remains elusive is the deeply personal experience of confronting our own mortality, a moment that science can't yet fully explain. The philosophical implications of death and the afterlife, the inevitability of death, forces us to grapple with profound philosophical questions about existence, meaning, and legacy. Whether one believes in an afterlife or not, death undeniably shapes how we choose to live. Over time, philosophers, scientists, and theologians have offered diverse interpretations, reflecting the complexity of human thought. For existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, the absence of an afterlife isn't a source of despair, it's a call to create meaning in a finite existence. Sartre famously declared that without a preordained purpose, humans are condemned to be free, responsible for forging their own paths. Camus, on the other hand, viewed life's absurdity, the tension between our search for meaning and the universe's indifference, as an opportunity to embrace life fully, even in the face of its unanswered questions. Secular humanism echoes these ideas. By rejecting the supernatural, it shifts the focus to the value of this life and the responsibility to live ethically. Without the promise of heaven or the fear of hell, humanists argue, morality becomes a conscious choice, not a divine mandate. Life's finite nature adds urgency, compelling us to seek meaning and connection in the here and now for ourselves and for others. For agnostics, the philosophical response to death is rooted in humility. They accept the limits of human knowledge, acknowledging the possibility of an afterlife without claiming certainty. This openness often leads to a focus on the present, where the unknowable future doesn't detract from the richness of the current moment. Cultural perspectives on death, beliefs about the afterlife vary widely across cultures, and they reveal as much about the living as they do about the dead. These beliefs often reflect a society's values, fears, and aspirations, serving as mirrors of the human condition. In ancient Egypt, the afterlife revolved around the concept of Ma'at, the principle of order and balance. A life aligned with cosmic harmony was thought to secure safe passage to the field of reeds, a serene mirror of the earthly world. However, this belief system reinforced social hierarchies, elaborate burial rituals, and access to the afterlife were often privileges reserved for the wealthy. In contrast, Hinduism and Buddhism focus on samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth, with karma serving as the guiding force. These traditions place less emphasis on the finality of death and more on continuous spiritual growth and moral development. The goal is not to reach a single destination, but to progress toward enlightenment and liberation from the cycle. Indigenous traditions, such as those of many Native American tribes, view death as a transition, not an end. The deceased are seen as becoming part of the spiritual fabric of the world, offering guidance to the living. These beliefs emphasize the interconnectedness of all life and the cyclical nature of existence, portraying death as a continuation rather than a conclusion. In Western culture, heavily influenced by Christianity, the afterlife is often depicted in stark binaries: heaven or hell, reward or punishment. This dualistic view reflects centuries of theological and political influence, but it also resonates with human desires for justice and closure. As we've explored, this framing is as much about cultural conditioning as it is about spiritual beliefs. The quest for understanding advancements in quantum physics have introduced intriguing but speculative theories about consciousness and the afterlife. Some ideas, like quantum consciousness, propose that the mind might operate at a quantum level, opening the possibility that some part of us could transcend death. While these theories remain unproven, they serve as a reminder of how little we truly understand about the universe. Could the afterlife exist outside our current scientific framework? It's possible. But until concrete evidence emerges, it remains a question, not an answer. Finding meaning in mortality, acknowledging the impermanence of life, can feel both daunting and liberating. Without the promise of an afterlife, every moment becomes irreplaceable. Each decision carries more significance, and every connection becomes profoundly meaningful. For many, the idea that death isn't an absolute end, but a continuation of life's cycle brings comfort. The body returns to the earth, nourishing new life, while our energy disperses into the universe, becoming part of the ongoing story of existence. For those who choose to embrace the uncertainty, the beauty lies in the mystery itself. The diversity of perspectives on the afterlife isn't just fascinating, it serves as a testament to the complexity of being human. A final thought: whether you believe in an afterlife, accept the finality of death, or find yourself somewhere in between, the search for answers reveals more about our shared humanity than about what lies beyond. The quest for understanding connects us across cultures, faiths, and philosophies. And perhaps the most profound truth of all is this: the way we approach death reflects the way we choose to live. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Whether this exploration sparked questions, challenged your beliefs, or offered a fresh perspective, I hope it inspires you to continue delving into the mysteries of existence. The legacy of our questions, even in the face of uncertainty, the questions we ask about the afterlife, leave a lasting legacy. These inquiries shape our cultures, influence our philosophies, and define our values. They affect how we build relationships, establish morality, and navigate the delicate balance between hope and reality. For some, the idea of an afterlife provides solace in the face of loss, a way to ease the grief of parting. For others, it inspires a sense of accountability, encouraging a life aligned with values they believe will carry them into eternity. And for those who see death as the end, it becomes a powerful motivator to cherish every moment and make the most of the time they have. The role of science in understanding death: while science may not answer spiritual questions, it provides invaluable insights into the process of dying. From research on near-death experiences to studies on the brain's intricate workings, science offers tools to help us understand what happens as life transitions to death. For instance, neuroscience has revealed that the brain's final moments are marked by intense activity. This explains the vivid sensations often reported in near-death experiences. Far from diminishing their significance, these insights highlight the marvel of human biology, grounding these experiences in observable phenomena. Speculative quantum theories also push the boundaries of our understanding. While unproven, they remind us that there may be facets of existence beyond our current comprehension, suggesting that the universe still holds mysteries waiting to be unraveled. Embracing the mystery: ultimately, the question of what happens after death may never be fully answered, and perhaps that's where its power lies. The mystery invites us to explore, reflect, and connect with one another. It challenges us to think deeply about what it means to live fully and authentically in the face of the unknown. Whether approached with faith, skepticism, or curiosity, death unites us in a shared journey of seeking meaning. Across time, cultures, and beliefs, the quest to understand the afterlife speaks to something deeply human, our enduring desire to find purpose in the fleeting beauty of life. Closing thoughts, thank you for joining me on this exploration of myths, science, and philosophy. The afterlife may remain an enduring mystery, but how we grapple with it reveals the depth of our creativity, longing, and resilience as humans. Whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or find yourself somewhere in between, your perspective matters. Together, we can continue to push the boundaries of understanding, ask bold questions, and embrace the complexity of what it means to be human. Thank you for watching.